The La Colonia neighborhood of Oxnard was shrouded in a pre-dawn haze when the patrol car pulled up to a shabby two-story building. The call came in at 3:30 in the morning. The neighbors heard screaming, then a suspicious silence. Officer Ramirez, the first to enter apartment 23 on the second floor, froze in the doorway, hesitant to take a step inside. 2 minutes later, he called for backup and detectives over the radio, making sure his voice sounded professional. This was his first homicide. Tanisha Brooks's body lay in the living room, next to the tattered couch she'd probably been sitting on when the killer caught her blood soaked into the faded carpet, forming an ominous halo around the young woman's head. On the wall behind the couch, blood spatters indicated the brutality of the attack. The 22-year-old woman was dressed in homemade pants and a stretchy t-shirt that did nothing to hide her 5-month pregnancy. LeConte Wilkins parked his shabby Honda at 5:30 in the morning. By this time, the crime scene was already cordoned off with yellow tape, and neighbors, despite the early hour, had gathered in the stairwell, exchanging whispered rumors and speculation. The detective put on his latex gloves in a familiar motion and squeezed past a young patrolman whose face had taken on a slightly greenish tint. LeConte Wilkins had been with the Oxnard Police Department for nearly 20 years. Tall, with broad shoulders and close-cropped graying hair, he wore a worn leather jacket under which he could see the holster of his service weapon. The wrinkles in his dark face had deepened in recent years, and his gaze had grown harder. His reputation in the department was mixed, a tough but effective detective who solved cases when others stalled. It was whispered that he was no stranger to brinksmanship, but he always got results. "What do we got?" Wilkins asked the medical examiner who was already working on the body. "Tanisha Brooks, 22 years old," he answered without looking up. "Multiple stab wounds to the upper torso and neck. Death occurred approximately 6 to 8 hours ago. I'd say between 9 and 11 o'clock this evening." Wilkins walked around the body, scrutinizing the surroundings. The small apartment was furnished with cheap furniture. Some items looked second-hand. On the walls were several photographs, one of which showed a smiling Tanisha standing next to a young man with distinctive tattoos on his neck and arms. "No signs of forced entry," said a forensic scientist who examined the door and windows. "She probably knew the killer and let him in." "Or he had a key," Wilkins said thoughtfully, looking at the photograph. The victim's purse was open on the kitchen table. The purse was there, as were the credit cards and a modest amount of cash. This wasn't a robbery. Next to the purse were several envelopes and bills. "Check all her correspondence and her cell phone," Wilkins ordered. "I want to know who she's been in contact with in the last few days." One of the officers drew the detective's attention to the mess in the bedroom. Drawers pulled out of the dresser, clothes strewn about, a jewelry box overturned. "It looks like the killer was looking for something," the officer observed. "Or wanted to make it look like he was looking for something," Wilkins muttered. The medical examiner beckoned the detective back to the body. "Detective, there's something else. There's old bruising on the wrists, almost gone. And some more recent bruising, about 2 weeks old, on the shoulders. Looks like the mark of a violent grab. Maybe she'd had a rapist in her life." Wilkins nodded, making a mental note. This wasn't the first domestic violence homicide of his career. Often it started with bruises and ended with a dead body and a grief-stricken partner swearing he didn't mean it. In the victim's jacket pocket, they found an ID card and a pregnant woman's medical records from a women's health clinic. Tanisha Brooks, 22 years old, was born in Des Moines, Iowa, 21 weeks pregnant. Wilkins instructed his partner, Detective Morris, to check the department's database for prior domestic violence reports and to compile an initial profile of the victim. An hour later, as the medical examiners were finishing work on the body, Morris returned with preliminary information. Tanisha Brooks moved to Oxnard from Iowa 6 months ago. Officially worked as a cashier at a Wayfair supermarket on Ventura Road. 2 months ago applied for public assistance as a low-income pregnant woman. No relatives in Oxnard. Mother still lives in Iowa, father unknown. "What about the boyfriend?" Wilkins asked, pointing to the photo. "Javon Moultrie, 28 years old. Currently serving time in the Ventura County Correctional Facility for drug possession and assault. Got in about 8 months ago, release in 2 years at the earliest." "So he couldn't have physically killed her," Wilkins said thoughtfully. "But that doesn't mean he wasn't involved." You can organize a lot of things in prison with the right connections. By 7 in the morning, the crime scene had been completely processed and Tanisha Brooks's body had been sent to the morgue for a full autopsy. Wilkins decided to interview the neighbors before they went to work. Mrs. Johnson, an elderly woman from the apartment across the hall, sighed, adjusting her flowered robe. Poor girl, she was so quiet, so polite, always saying hello. In the last few months, she's just started to get excited that she's going to have a baby. Have you noticed anyone suspicious around her apartment lately? Wilkins asked. Well, there's a lot of people walking around, Detective. It's kind of a neighborhood. She shook her head. But there was this one man, tall, thin. Came in a few times in the last month, always wearing a hoodie. I never really saw his face. When was the last time you saw him? Last night, maybe around 8 o'clock. I was watching a soap opera. I went out to get the mail, and he was coming up the stairs. He was walking fast, like he was in a hurry. Another neighbor, a young guy from the apartment one floor above, told of frequent loud conversations from Tanisha's apartment. She was on the phone a lot, sometimes yelling. A couple times I heard her arguing with someone. She kept saying a name like Javon a lot. Did you hear anything last night? Wilkins asked. I got home from work around 10. I heard some noise from downstairs, but I thought it was the TV. You know, the walls are thin in here. Detectives were back at the station by noon. Wilkins put Tanisha's picture on the board and began to put together a timeline of her last few days. The victim's cell phone had been sent to forensics, but a preliminary examination of the call log showed an interesting pattern. More than 20 calls from the same number of the correctional facility in the last month, the technician reported. Especially many in the last week. 3 calls the day before yesterday, 2 calls yesterday afternoon. Check the content of those calls, Wilkins said. We need records of all the calls from the prison. Tanisha's apartment also contained a stack of letters tied with a rubber band and hidden under the mattress. They were all from Javon Moultrie at the prison. Most contained the usual phrases about love and future plans for such cases, but the last few letters differed sharply in tone. I know what you do when you think no one can see, one line read. People tell me different things about you. You think I don't know anything around here? I have eyes and ears everywhere. In the most recent letter, dated just a week earlier, the threats became explicit. You are my woman, Tanisha. Only mine. And if I find out that you're messing around with someone behind my back while I'm sitting here, you know what happens to traitors. Wilkins reread the letters several times, noting the growing aggression and paranoia. It was like a motive. Jealousy, heightened by prison isolation, multiplied by rumors and perhaps actual treason. Could Javon Moultrie have organized the murder from prison? Wilkins asked his partner. What do we have on him besides drugs and assault? Was involved with the Southside Brothers street gang as a teenager, Morris replied, leafing through the paperwork. Several arrests for fighting, suspected extortion, but the cases never went to trial because witnesses refused to testify. Last time he was picked up with a pretty big shipment of crack cocaine, and after resisting arrest. From what I know of the gang, they have plenty of connections both inside and outside of prison. The detective nodded. That made sense. A man with those connections could very well have organized a murder even while behind bars. The first results of the phone call analysis confirmed the suspicions. In the last conversation between Tanisha and Javon, just a day before the murder, tension was clearly audible. You're cheating on me, Tanisha! Don't lie! Javon shouted. You're out of your mind, Javon. I'm pregnant with your child. What are you even talking about? She replied, but the detective caught a note of fear in her voice. I've been told everything. You were seen with him. Do you think I'm sitting here blind? You're my woman, do you understand? And if I find out that... Followed by a series of threats, after which Tanisha hung up. By the end of the day, the picture began to emerge. Tanisha Brooks, a young woman from Iowa, had moved to Oxnard after her boyfriend, Javon Moultrie. Shortly after the move, Javon went to prison, and Tanisha was left alone, pregnant, in a strange town. Life on a cashier's salary wasn't easy, especially while expecting a baby. Perhaps she had found someone who could provide her with a better life. Or maybe she was just looking for solace while her boyfriend served time. Javan found out about it, through friends, rumors, or whatever, and seized by jealousy, decided to punish her. But who's the perpetrator? The mysterious hooded man the neighbor saw? Someone from Javan's gang? "We're going to the prison first thing tomorrow," Wilkins said as he gathered up his paperwork. "I want to talk to this Javan Moultrie personally." At 9:30 the next morning, Detectives Wilkins and Morris drove up to the Ventura County Correctional Facility. After standard security procedures, they were led into an interrogation room where Javan Moultrie was already waiting. He looked calmer than Wilkins had expected. Tall, wiry, with tattoos rising from his neck to his left cheek, symbols of the Southside Brothers gang. His eyes, dark and wary, scrutinized the detectives as he leaned back casually in his chair, displaying ostentatious indifference. Javan Moultrie sat in the Ventura County Correctional Facility interview room with surprising composure for a man who had just been notified of the death of his pregnant girlfriend. His tattooed hands were folded on the metal table. The look in his dark eyes remained impenetrable as Detective Wilkins introduced himself and explained the reason for his visit. "When was the last time you spoke to Tanisha Brooks?" Wilkins began, watching the prisoner's reaction carefully. "2 days ago," Javan answered in a steady voice. "Just a routine call. Asked how she was doing, how the kid was doing." "All phone calls in prison are recorded, Mr. Moultrie," Wilkins said, opening the transcript folder. "In your last conversation, you accused her of cheating and threatened her. Would you like to revise your statement?" A shadow ran across Javan's face, but he quickly regained control. "We had a fight, yes. Couples do that. Especially when one's in jail and the other one's—" He paused with his jaw clenched. "But I didn't kill her. As you can see, I'm here." "No one's saying you personally held the knife, Mr. Moultrie." Wilkins leaned back in his chair. "But there are many ways to organize a murder, even from behind bars, especially for a man with your connections." Javan grinned, but there was no mirth in his eyes. "You mean the gang? That's in the past. I quit after I met Tanisha. I wanted to start a new life." "Start a new life by hoarding drugs and assaulting a police officer?" Wilkins raised an eyebrow skeptically. "That's a misunderstanding." Javan shrugged. "Yeah, I was selling a little weed to give me and Tanisha enough to live on. The officer just caught me off guard. I thought it was a robbery." Detective Morris silently pulled out the crime scene photos and laid them out in front of Javan. Images of Tanisha's bloody body, her eyes open in a mute scream. Normally, such a technique would elicit a strong emotional reaction from suspects, but Javan only glanced at the photos, then looked away and gritted his teeth. "You don't seem particularly upset, Mr. Moultrie," Wilkins said. "I've already mourned her," Javan replied quietly. "When I found out she was cheating on me, she died for me in that moment. So you admit that you knew she was unfaithful?" Javan's eyes flashed with anger. "Of course I did. You think I'm sitting here knowing nothing? I have friends outside. They told me she was seeing someone else. While I'm sitting here, she's been having fun with some bastard. My woman, pregnant with my baby." "Are you sure the baby's yours?" Wilkins asked, watching for a reaction. Javan slammed his fist on the table so hard that the guard at the door jerked. "He's mine," he growled, losing control for the first time. "She was 3 months pregnant when they put me away. You know math? Or do you think she's been cheating on me all this time?" Wilkins paused, giving Javan time to calm down. "Who told you about her new man?" Javan pulled his mask of calm back on. "I don't remember. Rumors, letters from friends." "Chanel Washington?" Wilkins suggested, noticing Javan's fleeting reaction at the mention of that name. "Maybe," Javan admitted reluctantly. "She'd come to see me a couple times. Chanel and I go way back before Tanisha." The detective made a note in his notebook. "Chanel Washington has now become an important figure in the investigation." "And what did you do when you found out about the affair?" "Nothing," Javan squared his shoulders. "Called her, told her what I thought. Wrote a couple angry letters. What else could I do from here? Like ask one of your friends to teach her a lesson?" "No," Javan answered firmly. "I loved her no matter what, and she was carrying my baby. I would never—" Wilkins scrutinized Javan's face, trying to find signs of lying. The prisoner was holding up well, too well for a man who had just learned of the death of a loved one. His anger over the betrayal seemed genuine, but the lack of real grief was alarming. Which of your friends on the outside would do this out of loyalty to you, even without your direct request? Javan shook his head. No one. Everyone knew I still loved her, despite what she'd done. After another half hour of fruitless questions, Wilkins decided to change tactics. Who's Kwame Jackson? The question caught Javan off guard, for the first time in the entire interrogation. Familiar, he finally answered. From the old days. Does he visit you often? A couple times. When was the last time? Javan shrugged, trying too hard to play it cool. A week ago, maybe. I don't remember exactly. Wilkins nodded to his partner, and Morris pulled up the visitation records. Kwame Jackson had visited Javan 3 times in the last month, the last time just 3 days ago, the day before the murder. So you lied to me, Mr. Moultrie. Makes you wonder what else you're lying about. The interrogation went on for another hour, but Javan stuck to his story. Yes, he knew about the affair. Yes, he was angry, but he had nothing to do with the murder. When the detectives finally left the jail, Wilkins was sure of one thing. Javan Moultrie was hiding something. What do you think? Morris asked as they got into the car. He's involved, Wilkins replied confidently. I don't know how, but he's involved. Too calm for a man who's lost a loved one. And that mention of Kwame Jackson, he was nervous. We should check this guy out. What about Chanel Washington? She's next on our list. Chanel Washington lived 2 blocks from Tanisha's apartment in a similarly shabby apartment building. The door was opened by a young woman with tired eyes and disheveled hair pulled back into a sloppy bun. She was about 23 years old, thin, with dark circles under her eyes that even makeup couldn't hide. Detective Wilkins, Oxnard Police Department. Wilkins introduced himself, showing his badge. We'd like to talk to you about Tanisha Brooks. Chanel flinched at the mention of her friend's name. Her eyes widened with fear, and for a moment the detective thought she was going to slam the door shut. But instead, the woman stepped back, letting them inside. The apartment was small and cluttered, but clean. There were several pictures hanging on the walls, some of which Chanel was in with Tanisha, smiling, young women embracing each other, looking carefree and happy. Chanel noticed the detective's gaze. That was last year, for her birthday, she said quietly, pointing to one of the photos. Before things got complicated. Were you 2 close friends? Wilkins asked, sitting down in the offered chair. Chanel nodded, nervously rubbing the bracelet on her wrist. Since she moved here, we met at the store where I work. She was looking for work, and I helped her get a job as a cashier. Then we started hanging out. When was the last time you saw Tanisha? Chanel hesitated, avoiding a direct look. 3 days ago, we had coffee after her shift. What did we talk about? The usual stuff. Chanel stammered. About the baby. Her plans. Did she mention Javan or someone else? A new man in her life, maybe? Chanel visibly tensed, crumpling her napkin in her hands. I don't know. Maybe. I don't remember exactly. Miss Washington. Wilkins stepped forward. Tanisha is dead. Brutally murdered. If you know anything that can help us find the killer, you have to tell us. Yeah. Chanel covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. I don't know who did it. I swear I would have told you. Did you visit Javan Moultrie in prison? The question seemed to take her by surprise. She dropped her hands and stared at the detective wide-eyed. A couple times, she finally admitted. Tanisha asked me to give him some things. To talk to him. About what? Things. How she was doing. She couldn't always visit him because of work. Did you tell him about Tanisha's new boyfriend? The room fell into silence. Chanel stared at the floor, avoiding the detective's gaze. It was an accident, she finally whispered. I didn't mean to. He asked why Tanisha was calling less often, why she wasn't coming. I said she was busy. And then he started pushing, saying he knew she was hiding something. And I just told him she made a friend. I didn't think he'd react that way. How did he react? He, changed, Chanel shrugged, remembering. Cold. Asked who the guy was, where they were meeting. I didn't know anything, I swear. Tanisha didn't tell me the details, only hinted that she was seeing someone. Do you know a man named Kwame Jackson? Chanel froze, and Wilkins realized he'd hit the mark. No, she answered too quickly. I don't know him. That's odd, Wilkins stretched out, because we have phone records between you and a phone registered in the name of Kwame Jackson. It was a bluff, but Chanel's reaction confirmed the detective's hunch. We're just acquaintances, she mumbled. It's no big deal. Did Kwame know Tanisha? Maybe. Oxnard's a small town. Everybody knows everybody. Wilkins realized Chanel wasn't telling the truth, but decided not to push too hard. They'd learned enough to start. Leaving his card and asking Chanel to contact him if she remembered anything else, the detectives left the apartment. She's scared, Morris remarked as they got into the car. And she obviously knows something about Kwame Jackson. I agree, Wilkins nodded. Time to dig deeper into our Mr. Moultrie's past. Back at the station, the detectives delved into Javon Moultrie's file. His history of involvement with the Southside Brothers gang was well documented. Joined the gang at 14, first arrest at 16 for petty theft, then a series of offenses ranging from vandalism to fights to drug dealing. One incident from 3 years ago was of particular interest. Javon was the prime suspect in a case involving the brutal beating of a man who allegedly molested his then-girlfriend. Witnesses refused to testify, and the victim suddenly changed her testimony, saying she couldn't identify her attacker. The case was dismissed. He's jealous and violent, Wilkins said, and he has a knack for intimidating witnesses. And he's well connected, Morris added, showing a list of known gang members with whom Javon had been in contact. Look, our Kwame Jackson is one of them. Junior gang member, several drug arrests, suspected of involvement in 2 armed robberies, but there wasn't enough evidence. A check of visitation and phone records at the jail revealed an interesting pattern. Over the past 2 months, the intensity of communication between Javon and Kwame has increased significantly. 3 visits in the last month, and a series of short phone conversations, the last of which took place the day before the murder. These conversations are too short for casual chit-chat, Wilkins noted, studying the records. More like passing instructions. The next step was to check financial transactions. Javon's bank accounts showed nothing unusual, small receipts from relatives, standard prison expenses. However, the commissioner of the Narcotics Division provided some interesting information. An informant said that Kwame Jackson had recently bragged about a large sum of cash, even though his drug business had fallen on hard times recently. Where did the money come from? Wilkins asked. He said he did a special job for an old friend, the commissioner replied, and now he could afford a new car. Further investigation revealed that a sum of $3,000 had recently been deposited into Kwame Jackson's account by one Marcus Terry, a cousin of Javon Moultrie, who had also been associated with the Southside Brothers. That's the connection, Wilkins said with a satisfied nod. Javon had arranged the transfer through a relative. $3,000's not a bad price for murder in their circles. But we need proof that Kwame actually committed the murder, Morris reminded him. The money transfer is circumstantial. Then we'll have to follow Mr. Jackson, Wilkins decided. If he's the killer, he may have kept the murder weapon or other evidence. It was not difficult to trace Kwame Jackson's whereabouts. He lived in an old house on the outskirts of Oxnard, and according to informants, continued to deal in small-time narcotics, although he had become more cautious after several arrests. Wilkins organized a stakeout. 2 plainclothes officers in an inconspicuous car were to watch Jackson's house for 48 hours, noting all his movements and contacts. If he's hiding something, sooner or later he's going to try to get rid of the evidence, Wilkins explained to his partner. Especially now that the police are investigating a murder. The expectation was realized on the second day of the stakeout. Around 2 a.m., Kwame Jackson walked out of his house with a small bag and got into his car. The surveillance officers followed him at a safe distance. Kwame drove out of town and stopped on a deserted stretch of coastline south of Oxnard. Getting out of the car, he headed toward the bluff where the waves were crashing against the rocks. The officers, using night vision devices, watched as Kwame pulled items of clothing, a hooded sweatshirt and jeans, out of a bag and began throwing them into the ocean, having first tied something heavy to them. One of the officers took a few photos, while another called for backup. Kwame was so focused on his task that he didn't notice the approaching police officers until it was too late. When the officers turned on their flashlights, aiming the light at Kwame, He froze like a deer in the headlights. One of the bags slipped from his hands and fell to the ground. Dark stains on his clothes were clearly visible in the light of the flashlights, which even to the untrained eye appeared to be traces of blood. Kwame Jackson sat in the interrogation room of the Oxnard police station, his wrists shackled with handcuffs attached to a ring in the desk. The clothes he had tried to throw into the ocean lay in plastic evidence bags on a nearby table. Preliminary tests confirmed that the dark stains were indeed blood. Detective Wilkins entered the room holding a file folder and sat silently across from the suspect. For several minutes he simply studied Kwame, noting his nervousness, the twitching eye, the restless fingers, the avoidant gaze. "You know, Kwame," Wilkins finally said, "there are two types of murder suspects. The first type are people who planned the crime, carried it out in cold blood, and covered their tracks carefully. Those are hard to catch." Wilkins opened the folder and posted photos of the scene where Kwame tried to get rid of the evidence. And then there's the second type. The ones who panic after a crime has been committed. They make stupid mistakes, like trying to get rid of bloody clothes in a place where they can be easily seen. Kwame swallowed, but remained silent, looking at the table. "The blood on these clothes belongs to Tanisha Brooks," Wilkins continued, though the DNA results weren't ready yet. "We have witnesses who saw a man who looks like you enter her apartment the night of the murder. We have your phone records with Javon Moultrie, and we have $3,000 wired to your account from his cousin." "I didn't do anything," Kwame finally said, his voice sounding uncertain. "These clothes, it's not blood. I spilled paint." "Paint?" Wilkins raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Is that why you dumped it in the ocean in the middle of the night? Preliminary test already shows it's human blood, Kwame. The DNA test will only confirm that it belongs to Tanisha." Kwame licked his parched lips. "I want a lawyer." "Of course, that's your right," Wilkins nodded. "But think about this. Javon's in jail now, he's got nothing to lose. As soon as he realizes we're on to you, he'll dump the blame on the perpetrator. He'll say you acted on your own. And guess who ends up getting the death penalty for killing a pregnant woman? It wasn't true. California has a moratorium on the death penalty, but Kwame was clearly not a legal scholar. Fear showed on his face. "I didn't mean to kill her," he suddenly blurted out. "I swear, I was only supposed to scare her, to talk to her." Wilkins was inwardly triumphant, but kept his expression unruffled. "Go on. Javon said she was cheating on him, that she was pregnant by someone else. Wanted me to see if it was true and to scare her into stopping seeing that guy." "And you went to her house with a knife, just to talk to her?" Kwame shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "I didn't plan to use the knife. I just wanted to scare her. But she started screaming, said she was going to call the police, that she was going to tell everyone that Javon had ordered her to be followed. She pushed me, and I didn't mean to—" "You killed her!" "It was an accident!" Kwame exclaimed. "I just wanted to shut her up. The knife was in my pocket, I don't even remember getting it out." "And then you stabbed her 16 times, said Wilkins coldly. "That sounds like an accident." Kwame lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. "I panicked. She was screaming. There was blood. I don't remember what happened next." "Did Javon order you to kill her?" "No," Kwame answered too quickly. "He just wanted me to check if it was true that she was seeing someone else." Wilkins silently laid out on the table a printout of the phone conversation between Javon and Kwame that had taken place the day before the murder. "Deal with this. You know what to do," Wilkins quoted. Those were Javon's words. "What exactly were you supposed to do, Kwame?" Kwame remained silent with his head down. $3,000, Wilkins continued. "That's a lot of money for a simple conversation, don't you think?" "That money has nothing to do with this," Kwame muttered. "It's an old debt." An old debt that they suddenly decided to repay right after Tanisha's death? I don't think the jury would believe that. The questioning continued for another 2 hours. Gradually, under the pressure of the evidence and Wilkins's skillful questions, the story began to clear up. Kwame admitted that Javon was furious about Tanisha's alleged infidelity. He repeatedly said that she deserved a lesson and that no one would laugh at him. "Did he directly ask you to kill her?" "No, not in those words," Kwame replied after a long pause. "He spoke in hints. Said she had ruined his life, that she should not go unpunished. Said that if she wasn't going to be his woman anymore, she shouldn't be anyone else's. I understood what he meant. By evening, the police had enough evidence to arrest Kwame Jackson on a murder charge and get a search warrant for his house. There, they found the murder weapon, a kitchen knife with blood residue in the gaps between the handle and the blade, which Kwame had not had time to destroy. The next day, Wilkins returned to the jail to re-interview Javon Moultrie. This time, the atmosphere was different. Javon already knew of Kwame's arrest and sat tense, his ostensible calmness gone. Kwame Jackson has been arrested for the murder of Tanisha Brooks. Wilkins began without preamble. We have the murder weapon, the bloody clothes, and his confession. Javon shrugged, trying to look indifferent. That's his problem. What does this have to do with me? He claims he was acting on your instructions. He's lying. He's trying to save his own skin. Wilkins put phone records and visitation logs on the table. 3 calls the day before the murder, a visit 2 days before, a wire transfer of $3,000 right after the murder. That's a lot of coincidences, don't you think? We're friends. Friends talk, Javon said stubbornly. And money is an old debt. And friends also kill ex-girlfriends at their friend's request? Wilkins countered. Because that's what Kwame claims, that you were furious about her cheating, that you said she deserved a lesson, and that if she wasn't going to be yours, she shouldn't be anyone's. A shadow ran across Javon's face, but he didn't respond. We've also looked at all your letters to Tanisha, Wilkins continued, laying out another trump card. Our analysts discovered an interesting thing. The highlighted words and phrases in certain paragraphs, if read in sequence, form messages. I know everything. You will be sorry. He will die. You will pay. It was a bluff. There was no code in the letters. But Wilkins watched Javon's reaction carefully. He turned noticeably pale. Bullshit, he wheezed. You made that up. Why would I make it up? The letters will soon become part of the case. Anyone can read them. You've left too many traces, Javon Kwame confessed. We have recordings of your conversations. There's a financial trail. There's a code in the letters. It won't take long for the jury to reach a verdict. Javon was silent, his hands clenched into fists, shaking with tension. This isn't just about treason, is it? Wilkins continued, changing tactics. It's about the child. You found out he wasn't yours. He was mine! Javon suddenly shouted, pounding his fist on the table. It was supposed to be mine! We were planning a family and she ruined everything! It was just what Wilkins needed, an emotional reaction that punched a hole in the suspect's defense. Chanel Washington told us everything, the detective lied, about how Tanisha confessed to her that the baby was another man's child, about how she planned to tell you the truth but was afraid of your reaction. Javon shook his head, his eyes filled with rage. That bitch? She laughed at me. While I was rotting here, she was having fun with someone else. Thought she could pass someone else's child off as mine. So you admit you ordered Kwame to kill her? Javon paused, suddenly realizing he'd said too much. I admit nothing, he said stubbornly. And Kwame wouldn't prove anything either. A prisoner's word against a drug dealer's. Good luck with that in court. But Wilkins saw the truth in his eyes. Javon Moultrie was guilty, not of holding the knife, but of giving the order, knowing how it would end. Leaving the prison, Wilkins went in search of Chanel Washington. She had disappeared from her apartment after Kwame's arrest, but police tracked her credit card and discovered she had rented a room at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. Chanel opened the door with a look of fear on her face, but when she saw the detective, her shoulders relaxed slightly. Did you arrest him? She asked quietly. Kwame? Yes, Wilkins nodded. We need to talk, Chanel, about Tanisha, Javon, and the baby. Chanel let the detective into the room and sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping her arms around herself as if protecting herself. I was afraid he was going to come after me, she whispered. After what happened to Tanisha, Kwame knows I knew the truth. What truth? Chanel took a deep breath, gathering her strength. The baby wasn't Javon's, she finally said. Tanisha had met another man about 3 months ago, a kinder one, not involved with gangs and drugs. They started dating and she fell in love. When she realized she was pregnant, she thought it was Javon's, but the timing didn't add up. Why didn't she tell Javon the truth? Are you kidding me? Chanel grinned bitterly. You've seen him. You know his story. He would never have let her be with another man, especially not with another man's child. She was afraid of him, even when he was in prison. But you told him. Chanel lowered her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I didn't want to. He started pressuring me during the visit, saying Tanisha was distant, that she was hiding something. I just told him she had made a friend. I didn't say anything about a baby, I swear. Someone else must have told him. Who was this new guy? His name is Marcus. He works as a mechanic at a body shop across town. Nice guy, really. He didn't even know he was pregnant. Tanisha was afraid to tell him. Afraid he'd be scared of the responsibility or that Javon would somehow hurt him. Wilkins wrote down the name and address of the body shop. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Did Javon order Quema to kill her? Chanel shuddered. I don't know for sure. But after I told him about Marcus, Javon changed. Cold, calculating. Asked me to find out more about Tanisha's new boyfriend, where they were meeting. And then I saw Kwame following Tanisha. Several times I noticed his car outside the supermarket where she worked. Why didn't you warn her? I tried, Chanel exclaimed. Told her that Javon suspected something, that she needed to be careful. But she didn't take the threat seriously. She thought he couldn't do anything to her from prison. By late afternoon, detectives had collected all the evidence they needed. A knife with Kwame's fingerprints and Tanisha's blood, bloody clothes, Kwame's confession, phone records between Javon and Kwame, a financial trail in the form of a money transfer. Chanel's testimony about Javon's behavior after he learned of the affair. The district attorney was confident that this was enough to charge not only Kwame Jackson with murder, but also Javon Moultrie with organizing the murder. The next day, when all formalities were completed, Wilkins stood on the pier looking out at the ocean. The waves were crashing against the pilings, a reminder of the inexorable passage of time and the inevitable consequences of our actions. The Tanisha Brooks case had been solved. The killers would be brought to justice. But the bitter taste remained. A young woman expecting a child fell victim to toxic jealousy and possessiveness. Her life was cut short by a man who chose to destroy what he couldn't control. Wilkins thought about how many stories like this he had seen in his career. Stories of love turned obsession, of affection that became a chain, of people who would rather destroy what they love than let it exist without them. The sun was slowly sinking toward the horizon, coloring the sky and water in shades of red. Like blood, the detective thought. Like blood spilled because of jealousy, because of the illusion of control, because of the inability to let go. He turned and walked to his car. Tomorrow would be a new day, new crimes, new victims, and today's case would be another reminder of the high price one sometimes pays for shattered illusions.